I never thought my marriage would end like this. I never imagined I'd be sitting here staring at my wife, my Emily, slumped over the kitchen table, eyes swollen from crying, her lips trembling as she tried to form words she had no strength to say. I never thought I'd hear her whisper that she had cheated on me, that everything, the panic attacks, the distance, the way she flinched when I touched her, was because of this. And I sure as hell never thought the next words out of her mouth would be a name. Mia. I felt my stomach drop. My mind refused to process what I had just heard. Mia, my sister, the person I had grown up with, the person I had protected my whole life, the one person I had trusted blindly. Emily sobbed, her whole body shaking. I could barely move. My arms felt numb, my chest hollow. It felt like the walls around me were warping, like the ground beneath me was cracking open. But maybe I should have seen this coming. Looking back, there had been signs. Emily had always been warm, affectionate. She used to pull me into hugs that lingered, the kind that made you feel wanted. But then something changed. She started pulling away. At first it was subtle, a missed kiss before bed, a delay before responding when I told her I loved her. I would reach for her, and she would flinch, just for a second, before composing herself, as if realizing her reaction was unnatural. I asked her about it once, late at night, when she had turned away from me in bed. She sighed, mumbled something about being tired, about stress at work, about how she just wasn't feeling like herself lately. And then the panic attacks started. The first one happened at 3 a.m. I woke up to the sound of her gasping for air, her hands clutching at the sheets, her body shaking so violently I thought she was having a seizure. I had never seen her like that. I tried to hold her, to calm her down, but she pushed me away, her breathing ragged, her eyes unfocused. "I can't," she kept whispering, voice breaking. "I can't breathe. I stayed up with her the whole night, stroking her back, whispering to her, telling her she was safe. I told her we'd figure this out together. She started seeing a therapist. At first, I thought it was helping, but then the attacks got worse. She would wake up drenched in sweat, shaking so hard she couldn't even speak. And the worst part? I couldn't help her. I could hold her, but I couldn't fix whatever was eating her alive. And then there was Mia. Emily and Mia had always been close. I used to joke that my wife and my sister were basically best friends, inseparable. They'd text constantly, go on coffee runs, have long wine nights while I sat in the living room watching TV, listening to their laughter spill through the walls. But then, it stopped. Mia started avoiding Emily. She wouldn't come over, wouldn't answer her calls. At first, I assumed they had fought. I didn't push, thinking they'd sort it out on their own. But then one night, Emily sat curled up on the couch, staring at her phone with a look that made my stomach twist. "What happened between you and Mia?" I asked. She stiffened. "Nothing. You haven't spoken in weeks. Did you fight?" There was a hesitation, just long enough for me to notice. "It's complicated," she muttered, and then got up and walked away. That was the moment I knew. Something had happened. Something big enough to break them apart. A month later, I had to leave town for work. Emily was getting worse. Her anxiety had reached a peak, and I didn't feel right leaving her alone. So I made arrangements. I took the kids to my parents' house so she could have some time to herself, told her I'd only be gone for the weekend. Her best friend Claire was supposed to check in on her. I kissed her goodbye at the door, told her I loved her. She kissed me back. "I love you too," she whispered. I believed her. I shouldn't have. When I came home Sunday night, the house was dark. It was quiet, too quiet. My gut clenched as I stepped inside, my keys jingling in the silence. Something felt wrong. And then I saw her. She was slumped over the kitchen table, an empty bottle of wine next to her. Her hair was messy, her eyes puffy, her face pale. It was like she had been crying for hours. "Em?" My voice came out hoarse. She didn't move. I stepped closer, my heart pounding. "What's going on?" I asked, softer this time. She looked up at me, and when our eyes met, I knew this was it. "I need to tell you something," she slurred, voice thick with alcohol and guilt. My pulse roared in my ears. This whole time, my panic attacks, everything. Her lower lip trembled. "It's because I cheated on you." My world tilted. The air was sucked from the room. My throat closed up. What? I barely recognized my own voice. Emily sobbed, gripping the edge of the table like she was afraid she might collapse. "I didn't mean to," she choked out. "It started as a moment of serendipity, a night that, at the time, felt like pure fate. If you had told me then that this was the beginning of a story I'd one day regret, I wouldn't have believed you. I had been invited to sit on the jury for a local beauty pageant. It wasn't something I normally did. My world revolved around blueprints, glass facades, and the calculated precision of architecture. But one of my firm's clients was sponsoring the event, and as a favor I agreed to participate. It was supposed to be an evening of polite smiles, empty compliments, and predictable winners. And then I saw her, Veronica. She wasn't just beautiful, she was captivating. There was a confidence in the way she carried herself, a quiet arrogance that didn't come across as forced. Unlike the other contestants who smiled too hard and posed too perfectly, she looked like she belonged on a bigger stage. When she walked down that runway, her gaze flickered to the judge's table for the briefest second. And in that second, she looked straight at me. It wasn't a casual glance, it was deliberate, as if she already knew she had won. Not just the pageant, but my attention. By the time the evening ended, I had decided I was going to marry her. The pursuit was effortless, not because I was particularly smooth or charming, but because Veronica enjoyed being chased. She loved attention, and I was more than willing to give it to her. I didn't drown her in compliments. She heard enough of those from photographers and agents. Instead, I made her feel safe. While others saw her as a trophy, I saw her as a future. Someone I wanted by my side, someone I could build a life with. And she let me in. Maybe it was because I never tried to control her, never pressured her to settle. I encouraged her ambitions, listened when she talked about her dreams of becoming a model. I wasn't threatened by her aspirations. I wanted to see her succeed. The wedding happened quickly, too quickly, some would say. But when you're certain about something, why wait? She was everything I had ever wanted. At least that's what I told myself. After we got married, I did everything I could to help her chase her dream. Modeling wasn't an easy industry, and I knew that better than she did. The competition was brutal, the expectations relentless. But I had connections. I had money. I paid for her first professional portfolio, set up meetings with agencies, and even flew her to cities where she could network with the right people. And it worked. Veronica got her first contract within 6 months. It wasn't a huge agency, but it was a start. She booked small gigs, editorials, catalog work, the occasional runway show. Slowly, she was building a name for herself. I was proud of her. But something else came with success. Something I hadn't accounted for. Power. Not the kind that's loud and obvious, but the subtle kind. The kind that changes people in quiet ways, little by little, until one day you realize they're not who they used to be. It started with the way she talked about people. She used to be warm, excited about the people she worked with. But as her career progressed, there was a shift. She would come home and complain about how amateur some of the photographers were, how pathetic some of the other models looked. I dismissed it at first. Everyone vents about work, but it wasn't. Just venting. She started treating people differently. Her tone with waiters changed. Short, dismissive. The way she spoke about her own family grew distant, uninterested. The things that once made her laugh now seemed beneath her. And then there was him. It was subtle at first. A new name she mentioned occasionally, Lucas, a young photographer, fresh to the industry but already gaining recognition. She spoke about him the way artists talk about inspiration, as if he was some kind of creative genius. I didn't think much of it, until I started noticing things. The way she lingered on her phone when his messages came through. The way she'd tilt her screen away when I walked into the room. It was nothing concrete, nothing I could call her out on, but I felt it, an instinct. The kind of instinct that starts as a whisper but grows louder with every passing day. One night, I found myself awake long after she had fallen asleep. I stared at the ceiling, a dull pressure in my chest that wouldn't go away. Was I being paranoid, or was I finally seeing things for what they really were? Either way, I knew one thing for certain. I couldn't ignore it. It didn't happen overnight. That's what made it so insidious. The shifts were small at first. Veronica had always been ambitious, but now that ambition had teeth. She used to come home from shoots eager to tell me about her experiences, the people she worked with, the energy of the industry. Now, she barely spoke about anything that didn't revolve around her own image. She was restless, impatient. If a job didn't elevate her status, she wasn't interested. I started seeing glimpses of someone I didn't recognize. It wasn't just me who noticed. One evening, I ran into Alice, Veronica's closest friend in the industry. Alice had been there since the beginning, back when Veronica was struggling to book even the smallest jobs. She was different from Veronica, softer, less obsessed with the spotlight. We met by chance outside a coffee shop, and I saw the hesitation in her eyes when she greeted me. "Hey, Daniel," she said, offering a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. I frowned. "Everything okay?" She hesitated for just a second too long. "Yeah. I guess I just don't see her as much anymore." I exhaled, nodding. "Yeah, she's been busy." Alice studied me carefully, as if deciding whether to say what she was really thinking. "She's changed," she finally said. It wasn't just the words. It was the way she said them, like she was warning me about something. Before I could press her for more, she forced a quick smile and excused herself. The conversation stuck with me, because I already knew. Lucas. His name had gone from occasional mentions to something more frequent. Too frequent. He wasn't just a photographer anymore, he was a presence. At first, I played it off. Veronica worked with a lot of people, and networking was part of the job. But there was something different about this. She started dressing differently. Not just stylish, she was always stylish, but deliberate, edgy, experimental, the kind of aesthetic that didn't seem meant for me. One night, we were supposed to have dinner together. Nothing fancy, just a quiet evening at home. She called an hour before and canceled. "Last-minute shoot," she said. "Lucas has a concept he really wants to try." I didn't say anything, just nodded, even though she couldn't see me through the phone. I told myself it was work, that she was just caught up in her career, that the way she said his name, softer than necessary, didn't mean anything. But I wasn't stupid. It was Alice who confirmed what I had been afraid to admit. I ran into her again weeks after our first conversation. This time, she wasn't hesitant. She looked tired, frustrated. "Daniel," she said, gripping her coffee cup too tightly. "Can I ask you something?" I nodded, her jaw tensed. "Have you noticed anything weird with Veronica?" I let out a slow breath. "You mean besides the fact that she barely looks at me anymore?" Alice flinched, as if she had been hoping I'd deny it. "Yeah," she said quietly. For the first time, I let myself say it. The thought that had been eating away at me for weeks. "It's Lucas, isn't it?" Alice stared at me. Then slowly, she nodded. I clenched my jaw, forcing myself to stay calm. "How bad is it?" I asked. She hesitated, but only for a second. "They don't even try to hide it when they're at the agency," she said. "It's obvious." The words settled into my chest like a slow burning fire. Obvious. Not just a suspicion, not just paranoia. Reality. That night I watched her. She came, home late, smelling like expensive perfume and something unfamiliar. Not alcohol, not cigarettes. Just different. I was sitting at the kitchen table when she walked in. She barely looked at me as she tossed her bag onto the counter. "Hey," she said casually, as if she hadn't been avoiding me for weeks. "How was your shoot?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. She paused for a fraction of a second. "Good." That was it. No details, no enthusiasm, just good. I stared at her, searching for the woman I married. The woman who used to tell me everything. The woman who used to laugh when she talked about her dreams. "Is something going on?" I asked. Her eyes flicked up to meet mine. For a second, just a second, I saw it. Guilt. She masked it quickly, forcing a confused expression. "What do you mean?" I leaned back in my chair, studying her. "You've been distant. And I know about Lucas." Her body stiffened. "You know about Lucas?" she repeated, her voice carefully controlled. I nodded. "I know you spend more time with him than you do with me. I know Alice has seen things, and I know you're lying to me." Her lips parted slightly like she was about to deny it, but something stopped her. Maybe she realized how pointless it was. Instead, she let out a soft laugh, not the kind that held amusement, the kind that masked discomfort. "Daniel, you're being ridiculous," she said. "Lucas is just a friend, a colleague, that's all." I let her lie sit between us, let her think I believed it, because I wasn't going to fight with her. Not yet. I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't going to demand the truth. Instead, I was going to be patient, because if she thought she could fool me, she was wrong. And if she thought she could walk away from this without consequences, she was very wrong. I didn't confront her again. Not directly. What was the point? She had already made her choice. The only thing left was for her to believe she had won. So I let her live in that illusion. I let her think I was naive, that I was the devoted, oblivious husband who would never dare to suspect her. I let her believe she could keep her secret. And in the meantime, I prepared. Alice was the one who gave me the final push. She didn't come to me out of guilt. She came to me because she was angry. "I hate what she's become," she admitted one evening when we met, in a quiet bar, far from anyone who could recognize us. "I don't even know if she sees it. She's too caught up in herself to notice how many people she's burned." She hesitated, then leaned in closer. "But I know how to make her notice." That's when she told me about the video. She had recorded it weeks ago, a silent piece of evidence that turned my gut to ice. Veronica and Lucas, tangled up in the dim light of an empty studio, too lost in themselves to care if anyone was watching. Alice didn't give it to me that night. "Tell me what you're going to do with it first," she said, her voice firm. She wasn't looking for revenge. She was looking for justice. I told her my plan. She handed me the flash drive. The opportunity presented itself sooner than I expected. Veronica had been invited to a prestigious industry event, a high-profile awards ceremony that would cement her place among the elite. It was everything she had ever wanted: recognition, status, the validation of an industry she worshipped. That night, she was radiant. She barely looked at me as we arrived at the event. Her hand rested lightly on my arm, but it was just for show, just for the cameras. Inside, she floated between conversations with designers, photographers, and industry executives. She glowed under the attention, her laughter too polished, her smile too perfect. She had never belonged to me. She had belonged to this. I watched her from a distance, unnoticed, irrelevant, and I waited, because I knew what was coming. The moment arrived during the awards segment. Each recipient was honored with a short video montage showcasing their work, their journey, their greatest achievements. Veronica had been waiting for her turn all night. She sat up straighter as the host announced her name. She wanted her moment of triumph. Instead, she got the truth. The screen lit up, not with polished photo shoots or glamorous magazine covers, but with grainy footage from a security camera inside. The agency studio, her and Lucas. The room went silent. There was no way to misinterpret what was happening on screen. Veronica, wrapped around him, her hands in his hair, her voice, soft, breathy, whispering things I couldn't hear, but already knew too well. Someone gasped. A few murmurs rippled through the audience. A quiet, disbelieving chuckle. Then the camera flashes started. Veronica shot up from her seat. "Turn it off!" she shrieked, her voice cracking, desperate. Security moved too slow. The damage had already been done. She turned, wild-eyed, scanning. The crowd until her gaze landed on me. I didn't move, I didn't smile. I just looked at her, and she knew. The aftermath was worse than I expected. Veronica didn't just lose the night, she lost everything. Her agency dropped her within 24 hours. Sponsorships, brand deals, future contracts, gone. No one wanted to be associated with the scandal. She tried to do damage control, of course. She released a statement, blamed malicious editing and jealousy within the industry. But no one bought it. The video was too real, too raw. Lucas didn't come to her defense. He had been just as eager to save his own skin, distancing himself as fast as possible. She was alone, and I didn't care. The last time I saw her, she was sitting on the floor of our apartment, surrounded by half-packed suitcases. She looked up as I walked in. For the first time in months, there was no arrogance in her eyes, no condescension, just exhaustion. "Why?" she asked, her voice hoarse. I stared at her for a long moment. Then I said the only thing that mattered. "Because you deserved it." I walked out, and I never looked back. I thought it would feel satisfying, watching her unravel, seeing the walls she had built around herself collapse under the weight of her own choices. But as I walked away that night, leaving her sitting on the floor among half-packed suitcases, I realized something. This wasn't over. Not yet. The video was only the beginning. The real destruction was still coming. And Veronica, so used to controlling everything, so convinced she could always land on her feet, had no idea just how far she was about to fall. Veronica thought the scandal was something she could survive. The best. First few days, she still held on to that arrogance, that delusion of invincibility. She posted vague messages on social media about misunderstandings, about how people love to tear down successful women. She thought she could twist the narrative. She was wrong. The modeling industry had no patience for mess. Scandals were fine, if they could be controlled. But infidelity, public humiliation, and a video that made her look like a reckless fool? That was career suicide. Her agency was the first to drop her. Then the sponsors followed. One by one, they cut ties, sending polite but firm statements about how they valued integrity and could no longer continue their partnership. Even the people she considered friends, designers, photographers, fellow models, distanced themselves. No one wanted to be associated with a sinking ship. And Veronica? She was drowning. At first, she tried to fight it. She hired a PR firm desperate to salvage what was left. They told her to apologize, to show remorse, to play the victim in a way that would make the public want to forgive her. She refused. "I am not begging," she snapped at them. "I've worked too hard for this. I won't let some stupid video ruin me." So they tried damage control. They reached out to media outlets, pushing the idea that the video had been taken out of context, that it was a smear campaign orchestrated by jealous competitors. But the internet never forgets. People dissected her every word, dragged out past interviews, found old stories from assistants and stylists who had worked with her, and suddenly, it wasn't just about the affair. It was about her attitude. Stories came out about her mistreating makeup artists, about her belittling younger models, about the way she talked down to people she deemed beneath her. She had spent years making enemies. Now they were sharpening their knives. By the second week, she was in freefall. She called me once. I didn't answer. Then she called again. And again, I finally picked up on the sixth call, just to hear her say my name in a voice that didn't match the woman I once knew. "Daniel, please, I need to talk to you." I let the silence stretch. She exhaled shakily. You have to help me. You know I didn't deserve this." I almost laughed. Deserve? She deserved better than to be exposed? Better than to lose everything? After what she did, for once I was the one with the power, and I wasn't about to give it back. You did this to yourself, I said flatly. She let out a small, bitter laugh. Right. And you had nothing to do with it? I just gave people the truth. Silence, then softer, almost whispering. I never thought you could be so cruel. She wanted me to feel something. I didn't. You never really knew me at all, I said. And then I hung up. But the worst part? Lucas. The one she threw everything away for. He abandoned her the moment things got ugly. He deleted every trace of her from his social media, distanced himself from the scandal, and quietly took a job in Europe. She reached out to him. Of course, she did. He ignored her. She had destroyed a marriage, burned her career to the ground, and he didn't even want her. That was the final blow. I heard she tried moving to LA for a fresh start. It didn't work. Her name was poisoned. The industry was too small, too connected. No agency would touch her. No brand wanted her name attached to their work. She had gone from rising star to cautionary tale. In the end, she packed up what little she had left and moved back to her hometown. The Eye, same place she once swore she would never return to. Months later, Alice sent me a link. It was an article, one of those "Where Are They Now?" pieces about models who had disappeared from the industry. There was a small section about Veronica. The article said she was taking time away from the spotlight, that she was focused on personal projects. It was a polite way of saying, she's done. I closed the tab and leaned back in my chair. She had spent her entire life chasing fame, and now no one cared about her at all. The last time I saw Veronica, it was by accident. I was in a different city, just passing through, when I spotted her at a small cafe. She was alone. She looked ordinary. No designer clothes, no makeup team, no entourage. She didn't see me, and I didn't approach her. She had already disappeared. The world just hadn't noticed yet.